Welcome to another episode of Women in Focus. In our studios, we've got a very amazing woman today who works with a lot of organizations, has got her little finger in many different pots, but is very interested in the resource our province has and portrays and works in. Her name is Mina Laudan, and she is our Woman in Focus today. Mina, you're most welcome in our program. How are you doing?
Good, thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here with you.
It is lovely to have you here because I've been thinking of talking to you for a very long time.
That's right.
Now, currently you are consulting with many different organizations, but the work that British Columbia does or has been quite close to your heart. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So I am consulting on my own now. I made the decision to leave a full-time role as vice president in the forest sector about 4 years ago.
Right.
Just to focus on family, and I did, which was at a time when family really needed me. Mm-hmm. And now I've started consulting again. And really, it's brought all of the pieces of what I worked on together. I worked in Ottawa in politics, I worked in Victoria as a political assistant, and then I worked in public affairs and communications agencies, and then I've worked in infrastructure development. So whether it's hydroelectric, forestry, roads, bridges, highways, that's been really the key part of my my work. And it's building the province. It's being able to see the province from Fort St. John to Vancouver Island. And it's amazing how many opportunities there are in a consulting role to really bring all of that information and experience to the role I have now. I think the important things is that we living in Vancouver don't often even know how much the resource economy in BC impacts us.
Right.
We will have our nice coffee and tea in the morning, in our homes that are actually made of lumber made in British Columbia. We turn the light on and don't ever think about where that comes from.
Yes.
And one of the projects I worked on was the Site C Dam in northern BC, where 1/3 of our electricity, when we turn the light on here, comes from those hydroelectric dams, decisions that were made decades ago. And we enjoy those benefits, and often we're quite unaware of them. But it's something that I find very meaningful, and a lot of our families, Indian families, non-Indian families around the province have worked on these projects in small and large communities, and they're really helped grow our province. We're a lovely place to work. We're one of the best places to work in the world and live, and I think it is a benefit of everything we've built.
For sure, but there are many people who are totally against all those. Yeah. Now, when they are against it, they have their own viewpoint. Does that viewpoint ever bother you when you were working with the hydro?
It has to be taken into consideration very deeply and very strongly. And often, I think when people come to a project, and there's diversity of views. There are people who are very personally going to be impacted, or for environmental reasons, or other reasons. Those views are critically important. And I think a lot of the views come from how things have been done in the past.
Right.
And it's up to anyone who's working on projects today to acknowledge mistakes, acknowledge when things weren't done the way they should have been, and learn and listen and improve on anything we're doing today. I mean, in this day and age, my view in anything that I work on is, what's going to be the legacy when we complete? We listened along the way, and if we're in the same place 5 years from now as we are today, we didn't do it right.
We didn't do it right.
You have to have learned along the way, and that means not just from the people who are communicating, but bringing the engineers to the table, bringing the transportation engineers to the table, the finance people, all of the people who are actually designing, thinking, building, and listening all along the way. And 5 years from now when a project's built, 30 years from now when it's still there, you want to know that legacy was etched in stone, and that it changed and it was better, and that it was the right thing to do. Because if it wasn't the right thing to do, then it shouldn't go forward.
So from the point of view of starting a project, to see it to fruition takes a long time.
It can take a long time. People have no idea.
No. and so the visionaries are looking, they are here, but are looking in the future. So they probably are envisioning it as to how it will end. Does it usually end that way, or?
It changes.
It does.
And in my view, there's a lot of theory on project development. And one of the theories I think is a very good one is that you have gated decision making. You don't decide today you're building it when you haven't yet talked to anybody, you haven't yet done a business case, you haven't done all your environmental studies. You might have 5 decisions along the way.
Right.
So you decide to start, and you decide to explore, investigate, study, and consult. And then maybe it's 2.5 years from now, then you stop. You consider what you've learned and decide, should we be going forward? Is there still a demand? Is there a need for this clean electricity we can produce? There was a time when people were saying, well, you don't need it anymore, electricity, we can do all these things. And then guess what happened? Electric vehicles came along.
Right.
And all of a sudden, we need electricity. And so, things change as you go. And if that hadn't come, maybe there was a decision not, there's different reasons to make decisions. So you don't want to end the way you started. You want to build in those decisions and really stop, think, analyze where you are, listen to what you've heard, see are these comments you can address, and then decide whether you go forward.
Now, British Columbia has so many resources. I mean, it's not just wood and lumber. There's water, there are minerals, and we are rich in resources. So are we, I mean, it's a broad question, but do you think, because you worked in this particular field, do you think we are using all those in a proper manner for longevity?
I can't speak to all industries, but what I've seen is when companies do things thoughtfully and really consider all of the impacts, whether you need to think of air, land, water, indigenous groups, communities, employees, technology, you can move towards the right decisions.
Right.
And so I've been fortunate to work in forestry, which has changed a lot in the last 30 years. And we look at where forestry is today, it's one of the most renewable, sustainable, carbon capturing resources we have over others. And I think if we focus on doing things in a sustainable way, then you achieve goals that you need to achieve. We're actually one of the most sustainable regions in the world.
Wow.
And I think because there was opposition in the past, and there was protests, and there was concerns, and that drives better decisions over time.
Isn't that interesting? I want to talk a little bit more about it and want to find out how you got into this.
Okay.
But let's take a short commercial break.
Sure.
Mina Laudan is our Woman in Focus today. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Women in Focus. Our Woman in Focus today is Mina Laudan. Now, Mina, you are in an industry that is ever-changing. Let's go back to your childhood. Where were you born?
I was born in India, Ludhiana. My dad's from Amritsar.
No kidding.
And Dad had already actually come about a month before I was born and landed in Fort St. John, where his sister was a teacher. His sister and brother-in-law were teachers.
Okay.
And I came with my mom 5 months later, when I was 5 months old.
Oh, wow.
1970.
Wow. Isn't that interesting? So, did you live in Fort St. John?
Well, I think we stayed 2 weeks at the time because my dad lived through winter for the first time.
Oh, and I didn't like it.
And he gave my mom the choice of Vancouver or Edmonton, and somehow they chose Vancouver, and that's where we stayed.
So, growing up in Vancouver in the 70s, how was that?
It was wonderful. We had a lot of family. I do remember a very lively childhood. A lot of parties, great community, kids around. Our house was just full, visiting uncles and aunts from around the province or from India, wherever they came, family members.
Right.
And it was a full, lively house.
So how many in the family then?
I have 2 younger brothers.
Oh.
But my grandmother lived with us. My uncles lived with us as they came from India and settled and got married.
And then separated and had their own houses and lived there. So I think Indian parents and Indian children learn to cope with one another because they have to deal with all the cousins and uncles and aunts, right? And it's not a nuclear family.
Never.
So were you in Vancouver, South Vancouver then?
Burnaby and then Coquitlam.
Right.
And we grew up in Burnaby and Coquitlam.
And how were you brought up? Traditional Punjabi family or?
Yeah, Punjabi Sikh family. We
Right.
had kirtan every Sundays with a group that we still see and are friends with today for
Right.
30 years,
Wow.
which was lovely. We all learned to do kirtan on Sundays and go to a gurdwara occasionally.
Yes.
So it was a full life and traditional in the sense, but then, you know, that was our home life, and then we'd go off to these schools where I
Yes.
was often the only brown kid in where communities we lived in, and
Right.
so it's a real mishmash.
So, was that ever expected of you to continue being with brown people, or mom and dad were okay that you had non-brown friends?
They were fine.
Yeah.
It was, you know, everyone was beta and beti,
Acha.
whoever came into the house. And, you know, my dad and my mom also worked in environments where there was a mix of people.
Right.
We were in environments where there was a mix of people. And, you know, at the end of the day, we had all religions, all economic, I think so many people in the house.
Right.
And, you know, at the end of the day, I think, you know, I say about my mom, the only way she ever judged people was on kindness.
Ah, isn't that beautiful? So, from your name, it seems like it's not a Punjabi last name.
Yeah.
So, it has to be a non-Punjabi name. So, how did you meet the guy you married?
We met, I don't think I've told the story to my parents. Can I share it here?
It'll be great.
No, I'm joking. We met in politics.
Yes.
And we met after I was finishing university. And we went on a political campaign.
Ah, and what was it about him that you liked, or about you that
He's
he liked?
kind. Yeah, just a kind person and smart. And, you know, in our family, we always did have people of different cultures come through too, so
Right.
it wasn't as, you know, shocking. And I think of my dad's business, he had a partner who was Chinese and Ukrainian and different, so we've always had groups of friends
Isn't
in our
it
life from
beautiful
different
that,
walks of life.
that you were exposed to different cultures and all that? So
Yes.
it wasn't difficult for you to.
I should say, having said that, there was an expectation. Of course, we're going to marry, seek, and, you know, become a doctor and do all those things. So we broke those molds all the way. All of us did. I do have a brother who became an optometrist, so there's a doctor in the family, which makes every Indian family happy. But we all found our path.
Yes.
I always had a love of politics and communications
Yes.
and policy. My other brother's in finance. And we kind of have a UN family, I would say. My husband's Christian, Anglican. I have a sister-in-law who grew up in Pakistan. And then I have another sister-in-law who's half Parsi, half Ismaili.
Oh my God, you've got
And
United Nations.
It is. And then even among cousins. But we have tradition. We have all in the family. And I think it's a testament to our parents and how much we all grow and change and appreciate humans and, you know, just kindness and humanity at the end of the day.
It must have been so easy for you to then, you know, slip into the work that you're doing, meeting people, communicating with them, policy making. So now policy making is important because you are thinking of the future. Whatever policies you're making right now are going to impact people that they are being made for and the future generations to come.
Yeah.
So you have to be very forward-thinking people. How did that come about in your life?
It's hard to know, to look back. My dad is always been a planner. He's in financial planning, and he sold life insurance. He traveled to communities around the province. He himself, I think, had to take care of his family at a young age, and so it was a passion for him, not just a career.
Right.
And so, you know, as much as I think our parents always said, you know, they wanted everyone to be highly educated, there was also do what you love and you'll find a way to have a career.
Right.
And I think for me, we saw people come from all over the province. I had family live all over the province. And I worked on a campaign which took me to communities. And what I love to see is we really are a frontier community, but there's, you know, Indian families, Chinese families, not white families, all who work together throughout the province. And British Columbia, I think, is unique in that. You know,
Yes.
you travel to small towns of Quebec and Ontario, they tend to be more homogenous. And so I think I really appreciated the diversity of our province and what it creates for us.
You mentioned that you married a person who's Anglican, Christian Anglican. Was the wedding Indian or was it Western?
Good question. big Indian wedding.
So all the mehndi and vatna and everything.
Everything. He wore a turban and the full outfit, and they loved it. Yeah, a full Indian wedding. We just adapted a little bit of a prayer into the reception, but otherwise it was a full Indian wedding.
Wow, and so he must have been very fond of Indian food and all that then.
Yeah, yeah. I found out later he'd gone and read books about Sikhism as we were dating so he could understand.
Isn't that just beautiful? To find a person who would be entrenched in your culture and then you learn from him about his culture, isn't it?
I think part of the commonality is that if you have a faith, you can appreciate somebody else who has a faith, even if that faith is different.
Yes.
And they're so much more compatible than you think. But having a faith actually provides a commonality right there.
We're talking to Mina Laudan. I'm going to take a short commercial break, come back and talk to you about how you're planning your family.
Okay.
Planner for the province is different. Planning for a family is different, and how many kids you have, but we'll come back to that. Mina Laudan is our Woman in Focus today. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Women in Focus. Mina Laudan is our Woman in Focus today. So Mina, we were talking about getting married and full-fledged Indian wedding. And so how many days? Indian weddings go on for 5 to 7 days. How many did yours go on?
About 5.
5 days, eh?
Yeah.
So mehndi, vatna,
kirtan, mehndi, sangeet.
Yeah.
Wedding reception.
And so now you have kids. How many?
2 kids.
Wow.
A boy who's 17 and a daughter who's 15.
So are you planning for them or are they planning themselves?
Oh, they plan themselves.
Any expectations?
No. You know, I think our goal is to build their foundation, but our kids are so different than who we are. And I think they'll find their own path, whether it's slowly or whether it's quickly. But they're both thinking of areas and fields that we are not even familiar with. And it'll be exciting to see where they go.
Isn't that just beautiful? We just talked a little bit about planning a city or planning the province and looking at the future. And you mentioned that, you know, you plan and you, after 2-3 years, you sit down and look back and see what we've done right or how we're going to change. I guess human life is also like that, isn't it? What your parents were and did and what you are doing and what your children are going to do is something totally different.
Well, and we have expectations of what we thought our kids were like. You know, me and my husband both were very straight up at school, got good grades, did our work, and then I have kids who think differently, and a daughter who's much more of a risk taker than I ever would be. But I realized, and you know, in academically and in writing, and I realized that's going to take them in different places, and it's exciting to see where it'll go.
You mentioned in the interview that you were working with different organizations, and then you took time off to come back to the family, and now you've started back again, but you have your own consulting company. So do you consult with only people that are in British Columbia, or does your work take you elsewhere as well?
It's mostly BC, but I do work with companies from outside of British Columbia who are looking to expand in BC and really understand what makes British Columbia tick. And so if they're going to build infrastructure, then you need to think about what matters in Terrace versus Prince George versus other communities. And so it's really people who want to come into BC. And the thing about working in this province is, you know, it's really important to be intensely local. It's hard to come in with a Toronto or a LA attitude. You need to the communities it's very local here. And it's important to know what makes BC tick.
When you talk about local, you also talk about the First Nations, the Aboriginals, the people who are from this land. Working with them probably enhances a project, doesn't it?
Well, you know, we have, I think, the highest Indigenous population per province over any other province. We also have the most untreated lands. So the way of working here is completely different than if you're coming from another province. And I think this is really a time of change in a positive way of self-determination, of partnerships, of innovation, and people looking to partner. And I think companies who come in building relationships first, and then looking at what kind of economic or other benefit can be achieved by working together.
Right.
There's some successful stories. We often hear when it doesn't go well.
Yes.
But there are so many successful stories that are also happening on the ground. Often people keep them close to their chest because they want to finish the agreements. But it's an interesting and exciting time. And we're a naturally diverse province to add to that. And so I think it's an exciting time in how we pursue projects here.
What is our strength? When we talk about British Columbia, what is our strength?
I think it's our natural beauty. I think it's a great place to live. I sometimes think it can be a tough place to work, affordability, and I know family who are leaving just because it can be hard to find the right place to live and the work that we do. And so that's why I'm quite passionate about making it a great place to work so that you can keep it a great place to live.
If you could see in the future and your work that you have done in the past, how would you quantify what you have done, in the past for the future?
Well, I've been fortunate to work in some industries that have built projects, well, bridges, sea to sky, different projects, Site C, the forest sector, and what I want looking back is that we did it well. We were thoughtful and considered input from communities, Indigenous nations, and property owners, and all those impacted, that we considered, that we made changes, and that when the project's done, it was the right thing. But also looking back that, the commitments, in a way, were etched in stone because they're now etched in regulatory processes, and we're living up to them and beyond. And, hydroelectric is producing clean energy for our province. Forestry is producing a renewable resource that absorbs carbon. I would like to know that we're doing the right path, or if something isn't, then we're changing along the way.
Where do you see yourself in the next 5 years?
I always thought, I have so many people in my family who think they want to retire in their mid-50s, and I thought I would be that too, and I don't.
No.
I want to focus on family and some work the next couple of years until they're graduating and launched and exploring their own paths. And then I'd like to actually kind of find that other chapter. And I'm hoping that other chapter is related to, making BC a great place to live and work. And I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'm looking forward to figuring it out. Imagine
it the way you want it. Yeah. And the universe will make every effort to make it come true.
I hope so.
I thank you so much for taking time and talking to us.
Thank you. It was so lovely to talk to you.
Mina Laudan has been our Woman in Focus today. Don't go away. We'll be right back.